Hello, thank you very much. I'm not actually the head of the museum. I'm head of the digital team at the museum. I'd love to be the head of the museum. That would be great. Yeah, so this is me. I'm going to kind of just do a bit of unpacking of what a museum is in this talk. Museums like to pack things together. I'm going to try and unpack them for you. Talk a little bit about our work as a digital team there, and then just have some provocations about what a museum maybe should be in the future. I've always loved museums. I never thought I'd work in one, but I think my love of museums comes from being taken to a museum as a child. I used to go to the Ipswich Museum, which you can kind of see here, when I went to visit my grandparents. And it's this old Victorian building. As a 6 or 7-year-old, it appeared massive to me. And there's this old, kind of really high-ceilinged entrance hall with a mammoth. There's a giraffe and a rhinoceros. And off to the left, there was this amazing room which had windows all the way down. It was really bright and had all these cabinets in it, flat-top cabinets with rows and rows of insects and bird eggs, things that were very carefully arranged. And I loved that sense of order. When I was growing up, I was taken to church on a weekly basis, and museums kind of felt a bit like church in their architecture and that kind of quietness about them. But as a 6 or 7-year-old, they didn't have the same rules. I was free to kind of explore. I could do whatever I want. Well, not whatever I wanted. I couldn't climb on things, as you couldn't do in church. But there was a sense of freedom and kind of exploration to the space, which I really loved. And it's that kind of mix of order and also exploration and freedom that I kind of love about museums. Yeah. I will not show you that yet. Before I begin, I thought I'd recognise the context of today. And I see some amazingly distracting Christmas jumpers. And part of the reason I love being part of a museum is that you can find experts in kind of any subject. So I went to our curator of contemporary and modern fashion and asked her to write a museum object label for my particular jumper. And this is what she came up with. So, Jumper by Burton. Christmas jumpers have been popular as an ironic, festive fashion statement since the turn of the millennium, spurred on by the current hipster trend for retro and vintage items. Acrylic, British, autumn-winter 2016. It is 100% acrylic, so I need to stay away from naked flames at all times. So this is what museums do. They put objects in a wider social context. They give facts about objects, but they also point to who wears them, or how they were worn, or how they were used. But also, objects mean different things to different people. So I thought I'd write my own label from a personal perspective about my jumper. The Christmas jumper, my one wardrobe item that is not blue or grey, to be worn at fun, festive gatherings to mask my social awkwardness, present from wife. So, which of those two labels is the better interpretation? This is kind of goes to the core of what museums do. It's that struggle of how to present objects in the right context with the right interpretation and the thing that gives the best meaning to that object. I'm going to just go through 3 quick examples, and I talked to curators about what context meant to them and their particular collections. So first of all, entomology. The museum has a huge collection of insects, and when insects are collected, a lot of data is recorded about them, particularly the date of that collection and the place. And museums can use that information over time to map the changing populations. These guys are dung beetle larvae. The dung beetle is not doing so well in Scotland at the moment. There's actually an amazing group called Project Dump, self-titled. They are the Dung Beetle UK Mapping Project, so Team Dump. And they've taken our data and have mapped the population of dung beetles across Scotland and across the UK, and they can point to things where things about climate change. Insects tend to move north when the climate gets hotter, and they've identified lots of kind of conservation needs around the dung beetles. That's one aspect of how context can help a certain type of object or specimen. Things get a bit more complicated when we look at a collection like the Ancient Egypt collection. The museum's currently designing a new Ancient Egypt gallery, and the objects going into that gallery not only have been taken out of their original country of origin, so removed from their original context, but they've also been taken out of spaces that were probably never meant to be opened in the first place. So ancient burial tombs that were sealed and never meant to be opened. So there's lots of ethical issues to kind of work through when it comes to a lot of these objects. So museums in the design of these galleries have to really think about how to interpret these objects, as well as kind of talk about how these objects were collected in the first place. Why are they in the present context of Scotland? So I've sat in lots of meetings in the design of these galleries, and so much thought goes into how to design and kind of curate these galleries, from what materials to use, how to use the very limited kind of size of text labels, how to put things into cabinets to kind of point people back to objects' original context. And thirdly, what if you don't know much about your objects? How do you talk about them in a museum space? Well, these guys are called the Arthur Seat coffins. They were found by a group of school kids who were out hunting rabbits in about 1836, I think, and we don't know what they are. They could be items related to witchcraft. Some people think they're the victims of Burke and Hare. They could just be kids' toys. But we've decided in our gallery to put them next to a copy of an Ian Rankin book, a contemporary object. I think it's called The Fools, and it talks about these objects. So that juxtaposition creates kind of new narrative connections for our visitors. And that kind of sense of connection reminded me of a concept that as a curator at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art talked about. And he talks about this idea of visual Velcro, this kind of sense that actually museums and art galleries need to get these hooks to kind of grab people's attention. That could be colour, it could be little fragments of memory, it could be those narrative connections. And some objects seem to have lost this visual Velcro. They've kind of been worn smooth because people have seen them, they're too familiar with them. These are people looking at the Mona Lisa, or trying to look at the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, and it's very hard to actually look at the Mona Lisa. Partly because of the physical aspect, you can't actually see over people and there's a massive scrum, and partly because when you get there in front of the object, you've seen it so many times it has no resonance anymore. So the museum's job is to actually create those kind of little visual hooks, or hooks of kind of narrative, to get people looking at old objects in new ways, or looking at new objects. How should the Louvre get people to look at all these other paintings on the wall that are kind of ignored? So this is Peter Samis, who came up with this concept of visual Velcro. He says, "Nothing hooks us better than a story. Once viewers are hooked, they will follow you anywhere, or at least stay for a while." And this sense of telling stories is at the heart of what museums do, and is the heart of what our team does as a digital media team. We do a lot of storytelling, whether that's on social media, whether that's long-form kind of rich storytelling on our website, or whether it's giving people on the outside access to the experts and the curators and the conservationists through blogs or filmmaking. So what makes a museum? You've kind of got some ideas there of what goes into making a museum. If we collected all the things that are listed on our jumpers or on our badges, our personal objects, would that make a museum? Here's what the Museums Association says is a museum. So museums are institutions that collect, safeguard, and make accessible artifacts and specimens which they hold in trust for society. They enable people to explore collections for inspiration, learning, and enjoyment. So if we bundled all our objects in the corner of the room, that wouldn't make a museum. We'd have to collect them together, we'd have to label them and record them and catalogue them. We'd have to make sure they're in a safe place. We'd have to interpret them, we'd have to do research around them. We'd also have to say to society, actually, we don't necessarily own these anymore, they're actually for the benefit of society. We then have to come up with a cool museum name and make sure people can enjoy looking at them. So that's some unpacking of what a museum is, but what issues are museums struggling with? And there's kind of 4 very quick provocations I've got here. I'm not pretending to have any answers to these questions. These are just questions to think about. So number 1, are museums neutral? There's a tendency for, especially big museums or national museums, to kind of step back from political and social issues and say, actually, we don't have a view on this. I think this can be seen in the current debate over the removal of statues, for example, the Confederate statues in the United States. A lot of people are worried that if you take away these statues, you'll lose a sense of history. And one of the solutions is, it's okay, we'll put them in museums. That always conjures up that last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where there's a massive warehouse and they're just wheeling in crates and crates of kind of replica arks. Museums, for me, aren't like that. They're not just big warehouses of history. If this Confederate statue went in our museum, I'd like to think that we would put it in context. We would say why it got removed and also why it was put up in the first place. Secondly, who is speaking and who are they speaking to? This is I'm not sure you can see this, but this is a recent example of the British Museum getting in a little bit of PR trouble on Twitter by saying that, this is a curator saying that Asian names can be confusing, so we have to be careful about using too many on their object labels. So I think this speaks to the idea that museums are not very diverse in themselves. They're becoming a lot more aware of who is doing that interpretation, who's doing that placing in context. This also speaks to the limitations of those object labels. I worked out that our guidelines say we have 25 words to describe an object. And 25 words is actually about 140 characters. So there's this kind of idea that curators are there kind of tweeting away about objects, and it's kind of sometimes very limiting. Thirdly, how do we get more voices or different voices into our museum spaces? How do we kind of break that kind of single narrative or the single kind of white Western lens that we tend to look through? This is a screenshot from the Young Fathers video they did in the National Portrait Gallery just over there that kind of confronted the conventions, the historic conventions of kind of portraiture and the symbols of power. And it got a very kind of angry reaction online with people kind of questioning their right to kind of speak in this way, which kind of, for me, made their point very well. So how do we invite these new voices in? And fourthly, and I'm going to appear very non-millennial and a bit grumpy here, is Instagram ruining museums? A lot of art galleries especially are kind of feeding back that people aren't going to galleries to actually look at the art. They're going to capture themselves in front of the art. But on the flip side of that, there's museums like the Museum of Ice Cream in the States, which sounds amazing, which has actually created galleries and experiences that are designed for the Instagram space. So everything's this nice pink color, there's balloons, there's things to take your pictures against. So, what are the opportunities for museums? How can museums embrace these issues? How can they change? And what are their strengths going forward? I think there's two things here. There's authenticity and there's empathy. Museums, in lots of polls of the public of who they trust, museums always come really high up. Even against teachers, academics, politicians, journalists, there's something about museums that generates trust. And I think that's really important, especially in today's kind of polarized society, that museums can kind of step forward and say, we are places of authenticated information based on expertise. The Smithsonian last week just announced that they want to, by 2022, have an audience of 1 billion people online. So they're stepping up and saying, actually, we want people's attention. We want you to look here and not be distracted by all these other things that are going on. And museums also still offer this authentic experience with real objects. Secondly, empathy. I think there's a real chance for museums to keep bringing people together in a shared space. And I really love this quote. It's an AHRC cultural value project. So museums shape reflective individuals, facilitating greater understanding of themselves and their lives, increasing empathy with respect to others and an appreciation of the diversity of human experience and cultures. So in a world of kind of multiple voices, of division, I kind of put this dead Twitter bird because Twitter is becoming very polarized and can be used as a force for good, but actually what museums can stand for is a chance to bring people together and kind of connect to each other. I don't think that means doing things like this. As a digital team, we create digital experiences, but this, and it makes me laugh and it makes me a little bit sad as well, this picture, because of the wild experience. This guy doesn't seem to be having a wild time. He's very disconnected. So in the museum space itself, we wouldn't do things like this. And this final section is just some thoughts about some projects or some things that museums are doing, whether that's new spaces or new people or new ways of interpreting objects that I've really liked and kind of speak to that sense of authenticity and empathy. So how should you interpret objects? This is a picture from the Tate Sensorium project where there was 4 well-known works of art in a room, and each artwork, you had a different sense to experience. So this is someone smelling, you had another thing where you heard something, you touched something, and I think you tasted something, and everyone who went around this experience was kind of monitored, and at the end of it you got a readout of your kind of physical reaction to all the artworks. Just a different way of experiencing art and getting people to focus and look in different ways. This little kind of strange nut thing was part of a historic royal palaces project called the Lost Palace. You carried it around the old site of the Whitehall Palace, which burnt down in the 17th century, and it enabled you to listen through headphones, stories about the palace, and as you moved around, that audio kind of changed, and you could interact with this kind of device and place it on different locations, and it told you different things and had different sound effects, which was a really interesting thing. Those two things are very expensive and obviously out of the reach of lots of museums. But this is a great example of something online that really gets you to focus on art and look at it differently. This is the Clyfford Still Museum in America, and when you click on an artwork on their website, you have an opportunity to do something called slow looking. So you press play, and the camera pans in on the image or the painting, and it slowly pans across and down and across and down and across. And it takes about 10 minutes to kind of look at a painting, and you really focus in on what makes that painting special and different, and look at different details. So sometimes do this at lunchtime, and it's really relaxing and kind of therapeutic. And other institutions are looking at ideas around mindfulness and how to slow yourself down and really look at objects. Secondly, who can you kind of bring into your space? This is a National Museum Scotland project called Museum Socials, where we deliberately try and bring in people with dementia and their carers. We run kind of hands-on sessions around with objects from people's past and kind of audio experiences. And we really want to bring in these new people into the space. Secondly, it's another project we're involved with in 2018 called Scotland 365. We're working with young Scots to kind of target 16 to 25-year-olds to bring them into our space and say, how do you want to use our space? What would make you feel part of the museum more? So this is an initial session we did just with a group of young people, kind of bring them in, just asking them to go around the museum and tell us what they think. So I'm really excited about this particular project. Thirdly, what should museums start to collect? I went to the Isle of Lewis recently. This feathery thing on the right is called a banag, and it's kind of an object that doesn't have a translation. Oh, sorry, I'm totally in the way. And this is something that was used up in the islands to kind of brush away flour when they were bread making. It was kind of a multi-purpose instrument that was used to brush up lots of different things. And there's a fear that these objects will be lost, and actually, if museums collect these things, who should be talking about them? Secondly, on the left, there's a guy mending fishing nets, and again in the Isle of Lewis at the Anne Lantyre Centre up there, they're doing a great project around things that aren't objects or kind of tangible, they're kind of memories. How do you collect memories? So hand memory is a big thing up in the islands of all these crafts and skills that are being lost. So mending fishing nets, needlework, craft work, how do you capture those and put those in a museum? Can you do that through oral history? Can you do it through video work, for example? And finally, this is kind of where I've talked a lot about objects, but talking to lots of our visitors, they don't actually go to museums for objects. They go for that kind of social experience. And museums to me are kind of civic spaces. It's very rare that you find a big open space now in the middle of a city that is free to go to, that lots and lots of different people kind of interact and mingle. Our director loves it when it rains because it drives people inside the museum. So civic spaces are they're extensions of the local community, a place where different people mix and cooperate around shared rules. So I think looking back to my time at the Ipswich Museum when I was a kid, I kind of didn't think there were any rules, but there were. There were just rules that made me feel safe and made me feel free to kind of explore, and that's what museums, I think, should do. So finally, and I'll end on this, there's a great quote by de Tocqueville when he was talking about America, saying the the free voluntary associations strengthen civil society by creating habits of heart. These are the qualities that citizens and active and kind of engaged citizens must develop to kind of safeguard our democracy and open civic spaces from apathy and the kind of tendency to slide towards fascism or despotism. It's these habits that I think museums could and should help us develop together. Thank you. I also wanted to say just at the end, one, please vote for my jumper, and also there's some, if you want to find out more about museums, there's some great resources. So Monday at 8 PM on Twitter, there's a hashtag called Museums Hour.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is a staff announcement. David Patterson kindly contact reception. David Patterson for reception.
That's not what I wanted to say. So follow Museums Hour if you're interested in this kind of stuff. There's a brilliant newsletter by a guy called Chris Unit who tweets out all sorts of stuff about cool things that museums are doing. There's a Story Things newsletter as well, which is amazing. And I've been speaking from a big museum, but if you go to Visit Scotland, there's so many museums around Scotland and smaller museums. So don't come and visit us, go to those small museums and discover something new. Thank you.